We're not even to inauguration yet, and that factional fighting, I would argue, is bigger and more glaring than almost any other I've ever witnessed in American politics. You're seeing that right now in the battle over immigration, which has been exploding among the MAGA right. Basically, Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy, the tech overlords who appear to be running Trump's second-term agenda, rely on highly skilled immigrants to power their enterprises.
Nobody knows the system better than me. I know the H-1B. I know the H-2B. Nobody knows it better than me.
The guy who's about to be president, the world's richest man, they're about to be in power. They're going to be making decisions. If this fight was any indication, this fractured coalition is not going to make governing that easy for them when they get in power.
Welcome to the Ken Harbaugh Show. I'm talking to Reed Galen. He's the author of the Homefront Substack, the host of the Homefront Podcast, president of the Union, and a co-founder of the Lincoln Project. Reed, welcome to the show. I think you hit the nail on the head with your latest Substack, which you titled Distraction, Echo Chambers, and Missing the Overall. We should be accustomed to Trump's strategy by now of, to quote Steve Bannon, throw it against the wall, right? Just to distract us and to get his stealth agenda through. I'm not sure it's actually strategy on Trump's part. It's more like his reptilian brain just knows what to do to manipulate the mainstream media. But what's going on?
You know, let's go back to 2020 when Trump's niece, Mary, wrote a book about him. And she said something in there that stuck with me to this moment, Ken, which was, since he was in kindergarten, Trump has been dying for attention. Let's call it the attention that his mom and dad didn't give him. And so he would do the most outrageous thing he could think of. And what he learned, unfortunately, was that when he did that, more people just stopped and stared or laughed than told him, don't do that anymore. And he's done it for nearly 80 years. And it still works. And we're seeing it today, which is, you know, whatever it is he says about Greenland or taking back the Panama Canal or 25% tariffs, you name it. The whole idea is to say the most outlandish, craziest thing because he gets exactly what he wants, which is the attention. It keeps him in the middle. Now, strategically, to your point, I don't think he has strategy in mind. I think that's just what he does. But as you noted I didn't even think it's a particularly stealthy agenda. All of those people like Russell Vogt that you mentioned right before we started recording, who's going to be the head of the Office of Management and Budget, and Susie Wiles, his incoming chief of staff, are happy for all of this because all of the hail and fury and upsettedness that it caused amongst the online commentariat, all the different panel discussions it drives on what's left of cable news, is perfectly suited to what they want to do, which is trying to do things that the average American is not paying attention to because, frankly, as we saw, they don't believe, unfortunately, that it has any real impact on their lives.
Can you talk to me about where the real power in government lies, especially in this incoming Trump administration? Because I would venture to say that a good chunk, maybe a majority of even this audience, which is pretty well versed in the inner workings of American politics, they don't know who Russ Vogt is. They probably know who Susie Wiles is, but talk about where the real power lies. And it's actually probably not Ramaswamy and Musk.
Yeah, well, let's start with those two. Like, they're never going to be government employees, right? Like, that they're never going to be hired as, I mean, well, Musk is a government contractor, ironically enough, but they're never going to be the head of some agency. They're never going to have an office in the West Wing of the White House. And again, going back to this idea of distraction, Trump and all his people are happy to have those two running around, making people crazy, distracting them from the things they want to do. I mean, remember, it was almost a year ago now, Ken, that you invited me to be part of a tabletop exercise that you and your organization put together. And what it reminded us of is that the executive branch of the American government now here in almost 2025 or 2025 has immense expansive authority if it wants it. We have seen it used many times, but never to the point that Trump and his people have said they want to in the context of something like a Project 2025. And so maybe 100 years ago, right, you brought somebody in to be a cabinet secretary in, name it, the Treasury or whatever. But for the most part, everything starts and ends with the White House. Everything starts and ends with the West Wing. I mean, even when I worked in the Bush administration 20 plus years ago, Ken, right, every morning there was a chiefs of staff phone call where the cabinet secretary of the White House told everybody what the message of the day was or what they should be saying, right? So like the centralized authority of the government is not new. The difference is now is that the things that, as I've said about Project 2025, the things that the incoming Trump administration wants to focus on are those things that can control people. And the things that they want to diminish are the things that typically we have thought of as helping people. And so that's really where they can decide, okay, so let's take OMB. Just to be very, very nerdy for a second. The appropriations bills, right? The bills that allow the government to spend money start in the U.S. House. They always have. That's the rule. So they say, okay, we're going to spend $500 on this toilet seat for the Air Force. The Senate approves it, right? It gets signed by the president. Now that's a directive to the Treasury and to OMB, the Office of Management and Budget, to spend that money. But OMB has to tell the Pentagon to spend that money, right? You are now authorized to take money and spend it on this toilet seat. Well, they don't have to do that if they don't want to. And we saw that. Remember, that's how Trump got impeached the first time, was that there had been money appropriated by Congress, by the people, to support Ukraine at that point in non-lethal technology. And Trump's OMB said, no, we're not going to send the money until and unless, Zelensky does what we want. And so this is where a lot of people don't understand that, like, whatever Congress does is just the first step. It's up to the executive branch to execute on things. It is the executive branch. And here's the other part too. Neither the legislative nor the judicial branches, they don't have any enforcement authority, right? They can't tell Donald Trump to do anything. And a lot of this is not new, right? A lot of it has been a gradual and successive ceding of authority by the legislative branch to the executive branch, usually when controlled by one party. And now, as we've seen with various Supreme Court decisions and a 6-3 Supreme Court, there's going to be very little judicial oversight for Donald Trump either, based on their decision that anything he does that's quote unquote an official act is legal. And so that's the other part too, is, somebody said this to me, it might have been George Conway. You go back to the plumbers of Richard Nixon in the early 70s, right? Those guys were all paid by the campaign because they didn't want them in the White House anymore. Well, now you'd actually put them in the White House because that would give them a protection that they might not otherwise have, because Donald Trump said, I told these people to do this. It's an official act. And so I'm sorry to be on such a digression about nerdy government mechanics, but it matters. And while we are screaming about Matt Gaetz or Elon Musk or H-1B visas, all this other stuff, all the things that you described and you laid out in your tabletop exercise a year ago, and what I've just laid out, go by the wayside because it's too much. And that's the last piece of it, which is, as Bannon said, just throw as much at the wall, distract, exhaust, and people can't keep up. And that's also part of what authoritarian movements do.
And Congress can't keep up either. You make this point in your Substack that Project 2025 is predicated on the broad exercise of executive authority. And I think your phrase is congressional approval is the cherry on top, not the sundae itself. I mean, Trump doesn't really care about Congress. So all this hand-wringing over how slim or how padded the Republican majority is, I mean, when you look at OMB, it doesn't really go to Congress for approval for much.
No. Nor should. I mean, and that's not how it works, right? Congress says, go spend this money or create this program or whatever. And then it's up to OMB and the other executive organs to figure out how to make all that stuff happen. That's not to mention the fact that who knows, Ken, how much money was appropriated and is sitting in Treasury waiting to be spent by the Biden administration, that OMB could say, okay, we were going to spend $1 billion over there based on this. Now we're just going to go spend it over there. And Congress can say, no, you can't. Okay, great. What are you going to do? Right? What are you going to do? You're going to arrest me? And so I think that's the other part too, is you remember that, and this would be something personal to you and other veterans, is that in Trump's first term, remember that when Congress wouldn't appropriate money for the wall, they reprogrammed hundreds of millions of dollars in DoD funds for the purpose. And I happened to be on a tour of an Air Force base where the base commander was saying, yeah, we're all taking a haircut, and now we have to figure out how to do the same things we did with less money because this is happening. They didn't ask Congress for permission to do that. They just did it.
It's Ken Harbaugh. Quick break here to let you know that we'd love to hear from you. Your comments, suggestions, thoughts about future topics and guests. Email us at info@thekenharbaughshow.com, and make sure to rate and review us on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks, and back to the show.
What do you think this brewing civil war within MAGA over the immigration visas can teach us? Because for all the attention that is being paid to Ramaswamy and Musk and their tweets and their history of hypocrisy on issues like this, the real power is going to lay with the Tom Homans and the Steve Millers, and it feels like they are set up to move extremely quickly in the first 100 days. They have the support of the base. Their whole theory of change is apparently do as much as possible before the American people get wise and before the law can catch up with us.
Well, I think that's right. And let me just speak to the MAGA infighting. And I wrote this in the piece, and I've said it many times, Ken, is that the only people MAGA hates more than you and me are each other. It is a nest of viper, and it is a viper's nest that, frankly, Trump encourages, right? Like so many, demagogues throughout history, he's happy to have everybody fighting with each other so long as that leaves him in the primary position. And he's no different. And so he's happy for all this because it makes sure that everybody's off balance. It makes sure that everybody's coming to him ultimately for approval. And he'll say yes to Ken, no to Reed on one day, yes to Reed, no to Ken on the next day. And then, of course, that is the way he maintains control. But also, it is chaotic. And look, the federal government is a massive battleship, right? And to move it 1 degree off of center line is a huge deal. These guys want to treat it like a speedboat. Maybe they can, but there are impacts that occur. Also, as you know, as a veteran, who's the person who said, no plan survives first contact with the enemy, right? At some point, something is going to happen, either internally to the administration or externally just out in the world, that will slow something up. Or change the way that they're doing something, because that's the nature of it. There's never been any endeavor in human history that went exactly the way anybody thought it would. That being said, again, when chaos is your brand to begin with, you could say, well, we meant to do it this way the whole time, right? They are not bound by fairness or truth or anything else. And so, I think that Trump will do his best to make the outside crazy, to keep the inside chaotic, and the rest of us are on, a roller coaster that's been lit on fire, and we're hoping to God we can get off of it before it burns us up.
What can we do, and then what can the Democratic Congress do, the Democratic caucus, to slow this down, or at least expose what is happening so that we understand where Trump wants to take the country?
I always thought, and we thought this, back when we first started the Lincoln Project, was that you didn't need to make up what Trump was doing, right? You didn't need to twist the truth. You didn't need to stretch it. He was going to do and say the things out loud. That's true today. What we have seen is, this weird dynamic politically in this country where Donald Trump's, favorability was, well below 50%. And the component pieces of Project 2025 were not enjoying any sort of broad support, either nationally or in various states, certainly amongst more conservative voters, it did. And so I think what it's important to do is the Democrats need to communicate effectively and efficiently. But here's what I would say. They need to do it, yes, to Washington, D.C., but they really need to do it more to their constituencies. We'll have yet another election in a couple of years, hopefully, and they have to go and start making the case for why, A, we shouldn't do this, but, and here's the big but, Ken, B, what we would do differently and how that will help you. And I think that, a lot of the stuff that the Democrats suffer from is is, you know, they spend way too much time in the clouds, not enough time on the ground. And you got to get back to where it is. I mean, you know, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, perhaps one of the most liberal members of the U.S. House, you know, a lot of people in her district in New York City voted for Donald Trump, and she asked them why. You both listen to us. You both care about us. You both seem like people like we are. These two people could not be further apart on what's left of the left-right political spectrum in this country, but they both offered voters something that they could hold on to. And I think it's really important for Democrats to understand that is you have to go out and make the case. I mean, you know, I gave a speech to the South Orange County Democratic women out in California right after the election. I said, you know, for those of us, look, I'm not a Democrat. I'm not going to be a Democrat, Ken, but for those of us who still believe that the country can and should do better, we have to get out of the yes, we have to call out the worst of Trump's transgressions and do what we can individually and collectively to slow them down. But also we have to build the alternative. Okay, if it's not going to be him, what's it going to be? Because just the absence of him, as we saw in 2024, isn't enough. It's not enough to say we don't like him. And I thought it was enough. I thought it was enough just to drive his numbers down. And that would be enough because the Democrats would come home. But let's be clear. Let's be candid, Ken. Like, Trump won because base Democratic voters didn't show up. That's why he won, not because he had some broad mandate from the American people, but because when Democrats could choose to vote for Kamala Harris, they didn't. And that's a real problem. And I think needs not, I mean, look, I believe that the Democratic Party is due for a reckoning, and I think it should be loud and ugly and all this other stuff. But the truth is that the Democrats have a lot of soul searching to do to figure out how to get those people who stayed home to show up. Because, you know, I'll just tell you this, democracy, right? It's on the rocks already, literally and figuratively. But Ken, you know, the opposition party, the party out of power, the Democrats, like, and those of us again who are in the fight, we've been pushed onto the beach here, right? We can't afford to lose many more places. We can't afford to lose many more seats. We can't afford to lose many more states. And now we have to go back and start talking to people in places like Missouri and places like Nebraska and places like, maybe not in Arkansas, but places, Ohio, right? Yeah. Places that had a longstanding, tradition of electing even conservative Democrats, and Democrats just, once they lost, they ceded the field. Can't do that anymore.
Yeah. Well, we've done that not just geographically, but with entire demographics. I'm thinking of how proud we were to stiff arm, for example, Joe Rogan's audience. I mean, that's not this audience. I'm not speaking to them through the Midas Touch Network, but I think he had something like 80 million people watch that interview with Donald Trump. And it was almost a point of pride for Democrats to say, not only are we going to reject Joe Rogan, but we're going to reject anyone who listens to Joe Rogan, which is a real tragedy because and assuming most of that audience is young men today, broadly speaking, actually believe in climate action and common sense gun reform and marriage equality, yet they vote Republican because, in my mind, we haven't met them where they are. We haven't talked to them. So Democrats have to do much better at that. And I think we'll find that there's a receptive audience.
Well, I think that's right. I mean, a friend of mine has a daughter who's at law school in Austin, Texas. And I was talking to her last fall, and she said, look, I've got a lot of young guys, white guys mostly, in my class. And she said they're not necessarily Donald Trump fans, but they think the Democratic Party hates them. Well, I mean, you want to go to just let's make it fun, right? Would you go to a party where everybody said, why are you here? Right? You wouldn't stick around very long. Right. And I think, take Rogan Rogan is a guy who hosted a game show on NBC, 25 years ago where people ate cockroaches. Like, so let's be clear, like, he's no great social commentary guy, right? He's just somebody who's entertaining. And I think, but here's the other part too, that I think is hard sometimes for Democrats to understand is like the guys like Rogan and even the Republicans, like they'll take anybody. They'll take anybody. If you're crazy, they'll take your crazy. If you are willing to agree with them on one thing, right, they'll take you. I say this is a friend and with love, because I think that the Democratic Party is the only barely functioning, small d Democratic Party we have left. Is a lot of times the party makes it very difficult to be a Democrat. And for somebody like me, who's an independent, makes it hard to want to be a Democrat. There's not a lot of room for, out of place thinking or heterodox ideas that haven't been, fully baked or, approved by some very, I assume, small, group of folks in New York or Washington or wherever it is. And the truth is, again, this stuff is, it's not complicated. Like, does the average American in Wisconsin Rapids, Wisconsin, it's not whether or not they agree with you, Ken, is like, are you even speaking the same language, right? Are you even, like, the things they have to worry about are not the same things that people on the Upper West Side of Manhattan have to worry about. And I think that's one thing that, like, we all have to do better.
Well, Reed, as always, great talking to you. Let's have you back soon. Where can people learn more about the union and the home front?
Sure, absolutely. So the union is a grassroots organization. We started it under the Lincoln Project back in 2022. We spun it out this summer. We'll have big news coming up here in the new year, but you can go to jointheunion.us. We, have 60 or 70,000 volunteers across the country. We'll be focused on places like Virginia and New Jersey and the Supreme Court race in Wisconsin this year. And we will be expanding. We have about leaders in about 16 states now. We'll be expanding to 50. All 50 states. And really for us, it's about how we learn, once again, how to communicate with people, not even necessarily politically, Ken, but just, finding them where they are. Also, again, you could find me on Substack at the Homefront, on Apple and Spotify podcasts, the Homefront, and, all the various social channels at Reed Galen or at Reed_Galen USA.
Well, thanks, Reed. We'll put all of that in the show notes. And when the union gets rolling in Ohio, let me know. I want to help.
Absolutely. Thanks, Ken.